After 20 days of scorching heat, torrential rains had been pouring down for over half a month. All the residents in the community were helping each other out, but I could only hide in an unoccupied room on the top floor, listening to the wails of despair outside. I admit that what I was doing was selfish and immoral, but I was truly afraid. I feared the dark side of human nature erupting. So, I stepped out of the living room again, treading through the rainwater to make sure the doors were locked. Then, I pushed the shoe cabinet and partition against the door, wedging it shut. I needed to ensure absolute safety. With the heavy iron gate separating me from the outside world, I wasn't afraid even of the potential loss of life. If someone came knocking, I planned to play dead. After all, this apartment had been unoccupied for days, and even after the power went out, no one came to the door. Although many people had come to the 31st floor, they all sought refuge in other people's homes. The downpour grew more intense, beyond the description of any red alert. The property management office was silent, likely submerged as well. After having lunch, I heard desperate cries from outside. The second and third floors were completely flooded. It was terrifying. I looked down and saw that the fourth floor was about to be submerged too. Judging by the water level, the city's government buildings must have been flooded as well. The cries for help were desperate, the atmosphere of despair spreading faster than the rain itself. Another 3 days passed, and the rain, now accompanied by a storm, had been falling for half a month. Except for the day I stocked up on supplies, it had been raining non-stop. I hid in my bedroom, too afraid to leave. The living room was filled with water, and the drainage system was failing. Soon, my bedroom would be soaked as well. I charged my phone with a power bank, using my data to browse the latest news online. With the entire country experiencing rainfall, the information available online was mostly provided by netizens in various locations. In the face of this unprecedented disaster, the cries for help were echoing from every corner of the globe. Messages of desperation filled the air. The entire basin around Chengdu is crying out for help. We're on the brink of a complete inundation. Yangqing is pleading for assistance. The Pearl River's banks have given way, and even from across the ocean, a voice from the US, I'm stranded here as hurricanes and tsunamis ravage the west coast. Is there any hope for rescue through the embassy? As I read these harrowing messages, my throat constricted and my hands shook with fear and anxiety. The reality was sinking in. This was not just a series of natural disasters, but a potential mass extinction event. The relentless rain that had poured down for weeks had thrown the world into a state of pandemonium, and the situation was only worsening. The thought was terrifying. What if the rain didn't let up? The death toll, already staggering in the hundreds of thousands, would continue to climb. And in the aftermath, as food supplies dwindled and the rot of the dead spread, the specter of infectious diseases loomed large. In a desperate attempt to stay informed, I tried to refresh the information page on my device, but to no avail. My heart plummeted as I realized the internet had gone dark. With the power already out, I was left feeling a deep sense of isolation. We were all islands unto ourselves, adrift in a world gone mad, each one of us fighting for survival on our own. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on my mind. It was clear that the world as we knew it was on the brink of collapse, and survival now hinged on our ability to endure the unimaginable and band together in the face of overwhelming adversity. A cry came from outside, "The flood is coming. Run!" Others saw it too and screamed in terror. They were in the corridor on the 31st floor, and from their vantage point, they must have seen the north side, where the terrain was higher with mountains and rivers. I immediately realized that a mountain torrent from the north had triggered a tsunami on land. Our once towering buildings were about to be hit by the terrifying force of the floodwater. I couldn't see the flood from inside my room, but I could hear the rumbling waves, the thunderous crashes accompanied by the cracking of buildings along the way. It was like an ancient beast charging, sending shivers down my spine. It was too late to wonder if our building would hold. Even if it did, the damage would likely be severe. The destructive power of the flood was no less than that of an earthquake. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door tightly, and crawled under the bed. I only knew how to hide from earthquakes, not floods, so my instinct was to hide under the bed, hoping it would provide some protection. If the walls were shattered by the flood, the bed might cushion the impact. I couldn't think of anything else to do but pray that the building would withstand the onslaught. The howling outside grew louder. There were frantic footsteps and shouts, "Go up! The flood is too high. Go to the top floors. Hiding inside is useless." Some smart people were rushing upstairs, which indirectly confirmed that the flood was indeed too high. The flood from the north was likely no less than a catastrophic tsunami, set to engulf everything in its path and turn the entire Yuching district into a vast ocean. Those who remained on the lower floors were essentially signing their own death warrants. Clutching the bed legs, my body drenched in cold sweat, my teeth chattering, I could barely hold back my fear. The traumatic memories from 3 years ago came flooding back: the cold, rainy night, the icy lake water, the shattered glass. I even started hallucinating, my mind a blank as a loud crash echoed. It felt like a giant hammer hit my back, and my body slid forward, my head slamming into the wall. In my dizziness, I heard countless impacts, the building becoming a rock by the sea, battered by wave after wave. The yellow, muddy water was filled with scattered debris, floating corpses. The flood had arrived, and many in the corridor were swept away by the force of the water, their fate unknown. They were too slow, perhaps because they had come up from the lower floors and didn't have time to hide in other people's homes. As the building shook violently, I heard the creaking of walls and the sound of plaster falling. Cracks appeared everywhere, and the ceiling in the living room seemed to burst. I clung to the corner of the wall, smelling the foul stench as the floodwater, filled with the stench of decay, flooded my home. I thought I was done for. The flood had reached the 31st floor, and I was sure to be submerged. But fortune wasn't entirely cruel to me. Although water waves kept crashing in, the towering waves did not sweep through. That meant the flood couldn't submerge the 31st floor. It might have swallowed the 20th floor and its tail lashed the 31st. I let out a sigh of relief, but my relief was short-lived as a loud crash shook the building, and I felt myself slide to the right. The building was tilting to the right, undoubtedly due to the flood damaging something on the right side of the building or creating a large hole. Whatever the case, the building's tilt was enough to indicate that it was unsafe. Hiding on the 31st floor, I knew that the building would eventually collapse due to the flood. The screams continued unabated. I heard a neighbor's wife shouting for help, her cries echoing in the halls. The building was about to collapse, and I, who was already terrified of water, now faced the possibility of the building collapsing as well. My courage was shattered, and I could only curl up under the bed, playing the ostrich. But when the ceiling started to crackle like steel and concrete breaking, I knew I had to leave. If the entire ceiling collapsed, I would be trapped here, possibly dying on the spot. I bit my wrist in desperation and crawled out, grabbing 2 large suitcases as I fled. I had reached the kitchen door, sitting against the wall, soaked through and through. My vision was blurry, and the stench was overpowering. I held on to the 2 suitcases, which were my only salvageable belongings. One contained basic food and water, the other, some medication. I didn't bring them out intentionally, I simply couldn't carry anything else. Suddenly, a loud explosion somewhere pierced through the sound of the flood. More ceiling collapsed, and furniture broke apart. What could I do? There was no way to save them. I crawled to a different spot each time debris fell, moving 3 times before half of the living room's ceiling was completely gone. Above was a blank sky and the relentless rain, like the mouth of a demon. I couldn't bear to look at it, struggling to breathe. I turned my head away and saw the world outside the balcony, a horrifying sight. The yellow flood roared and raged, carrying trees, buildings, and the dead, all streaming southward.